After 10 years, we finally have another console release of a Valkyria Chronicles game. A decade. It's incredible. You know what? It's just so surprising that this series has made it to another console release. And yes, that is not a clickbait title. About 2 days before the release of the game, I broke my hand in a cycling accident, and I was in a very tight and unwieldy splint for a while. So if my gameplay looks a little awkward, it's because it was extremely awkward for me to play with my hand. My accident was a little bit serious, and now part of my hand is made of metal.
You're gonna be more nuts and bolts than flesh and blood.
Anyway, enough about me. Let's get into the game that many people have been waiting 10 years for. When I first started playing this game, it didn't wow me. Missions felt small and was sort of overly familiar. But when that Siegfried line mission started up, it was just really a jolt of how the game was actually going to be like. The levels are just huge in this game, and I love it. It really has more of that Battlefield type feel, and the size combined with the new mortar class means that scout rushing is a little bit less effective. Yes, an entirely new class, and a fairly interesting one at that. Part of its design was to make interception fire during and in between turns a bit more interesting, and I would say it definitely achieves that goal. It's also a unit which encourages good positioning and some defensive tactics, which is what this series needs a lot more of. Great overall addition to the series, and they can really make for some challenging enemies. Snipers can intercept fire now, which is a great addition to the game. It actually has a decent impact on how you play, and once again relies on good unit positioning or dodging ability in interception fire, where you have to vary your movement to avoid bullets, just like you would with actual sniper fire. Lots of nice improvements have been implemented over from the PSP releases and mix really well with the console scale of this game. There were some points where I was just stumped for a moment and had to pause and think of a plan. That's a great and satisfying feeling, and one I haven't felt from a game in a long time. However, despite some fixing and adjustments, order abuse is still fairly prevalent in this game, and A ranking missions is far from difficult. The character roster in this game is massive, which means that you have a lot of choice in who you field. They're not super specialized, but combined with the varied roster of bonus weapons and an expanded version of the accessory system from Valkyria Chronicles 3, you can create some really specialized units. I can see the roster and style of units deployed being very different from player to player, which is something I really value a lot. However, this ties in with one of the issues I had with this game. In the first game, you were incentivized to have your protagonists on the field by gaining an extra CP when you deployed them. Not only that, but they were dramatically superior to your other units. So this meant many battles with Alicia, Largo and Rosie, which is a little boring. This was changed for the better in Valkyria Chronicles 2 and 3, with only one mandated leader and selectable leaders of your choice. But in Valkyria Chronicles 4, it's worse than ever. 4 mandated leaders and 1 selectable one. The advantage of even 1 extra CP is too great, and the mandated leaders are leaps and bounds better than every other unit. So you really don't even get an opportunity to exercise a full sense of choice, and half the deployment available per mission is essentially fixed. Flies right in the face of all the personalized choice you should have open to you. Weapon balance is definitely better in this game compared to the first, but it's not perfect. There aren't any totally useless weapons, but there are some that get pretty close. It's just not a very exciting upgrade tree. Differences between weapons of the same class can be so slight that no matter which one you choose to go with, it really won't radically change your playstyle, which is frankly a bit lame. I think it's fairly common to see structural issues with stories in video games, and frankly it's more common in Japanese games. That's why I was surprised to see that the structure here is actually pretty solid. Okay, let's start off with a comparison to the first game. There are 2 key elements that make up the foundation for Valkyria Chronicles 1, that being a historical basis and a fantastical element. Valkyria Chronicles 4 runs on the same idea of those key elements for its foundation. Since the Federation is a representation of Western powers, there is an element of the island hopping in the Pacific campaign, except this time on a frozen sea instead of a tropical one. which culminates with the invasion of the mainland and the threat of what is essentially an atom bomb, and all the ethics that come with that. With the fantastical element of the first game, it was very medieval fantasy. Princesses, castles, lances, plate armor, etc. You get the picture. In Valkyria Chronicles 4, the fantastical element is drawn more from something like a Brothers Grimm folktale. A cursed crying witch with otherworldly powers who is abused and tortured, and a prince who rescues her and breaks the curse with the power of love. Continuing with how the game is structured, the first half is dedicated to introducing characters and the current climate of the in-game world, with the second half properly introducing villains to test our protagonists. And each character also gets a dedicated subsection of the story to focus on their arc. So, in my opinion, this is a really solid structure for a Valkyria Chronicles game, and I could tell they put some thought into how this game should play out. Okay, so how did they fuck it up? There's 3 central elements. Those aforementioned foundational elements, which is what should be the core of these games, is not really a significant part of the story until very late into the game, and isn't really replaced with anything significant or even passingly interesting. The game starts out as really dry because of this, and I was frankly quite uninterested for about the first half of this game. They chose really interesting ideas and just spend very little time on them, which the game suffers for. Second big issue is that this game has way too many villains. There is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bad guys in this game. The more bad guys you have, the less time for development you have for each individual, so you care about them less and less. All of them are underdeveloped, but each one has a unique issue for why they don't work. Waltz is a bit of a less interesting Jaeger ripoff, but also in his defense, he does have a place in the core elements of the game, and is a generally likable villain. Chimeria lacks a lot in the development department, but I appreciate she is quite different from the Valkyria in the previous games. Here's where we start getting into the real issues with Forseti. He has an interesting backstory with him defecting to the Imperials based on the poor ethics of the Federation governments. But he joins another unethical research facility in the Imperial Army, which goes against the basis for why he left the Federation. And instead of him staying level-headed, he eventually becomes psychotic in his quest to save Angie, essentially so that the protagonists are validated in killing him. That's the only reason he goes psychotic. Forseti's character should have revolved around the atom bomb equivalent in this game, and his defection was about, in his opinion, trying to save the Federation from a mistake that would stain them for centuries. Just like the supposed Darkson calamity stained the reputation of Darksons for generations, and in his own eyes he is the ultimate hero of the Federation. So the concept of the justification of the atom bombs used in World War II is incorporated more into the game, which is a discussion that still goes on today. But hey now, that would be too complex, too political, and paint our protagonists as morally grey rather than shining heroes, which this game is too afraid of. A missed opportunity. Nicola and Chiara are completely pointless villains, with their only characterization being that they're crazy. That's it. In my opinion, the only reason they exist is for marketing material. What do I mean by this? Well, all the sexualized Salvaria merchandise would have made Sega a bit of pocket money. So at the start of the development for this game, someone must have said, hey, we need some dumb, out-of-place sexy shit so we can sell figures and other crap at exorbitant prices to whoever will buy it. This is the cornerstone of modern Japanese anime, manga, and video game marketing to help supplement the potential success, or lack thereof, in their products with sexualized merchandising. Okay, look, I'm not trying to be a prude. If you want to buy and enjoy Dead or Alive Volleyball 46, then go for it. But shoving this shit right next to commentary of atomic bombs, the justification of military invasions, and doubting the authority figures of the government you're meant to protect, undermines it completely. This good scene about the nature of humanity and camaraderie in war, and the societal and cultural separations between nations is missing something. I know, gratuitous out-of-place nudity. Much better. Nicola and Chiara serve no real purpose other than trying to hook in saps to pay money for merch. Arguably the same reason Minerva is in the game, with her very out of place and potentially fetish bait design and ridiculous boob jiggle. Belga, I think, is meant to reflect on Joseph Mengele, aka Dr. Death, but there isn't much point to his character in the game other than to serve as the unnecessary out-of-place JRPG-esque final boss. Other than that, he's just a generic mad scientist, which is about as tired as a trope as filmmaking itself. It's entirely possible that he exists for the sole purpose of giving Nicola and Chiara an origin. So the villain cast is pointlessly large for the wrong reasons, and the game would have been better off with these three gone. The third issue is the simplest one, and is arguably the biggest one. How the character backgrounds are treated is really poor, and arguably has a negative impact on the entire game. The whole concept of everyone being childhood friends from Galia is really confusing and unnecessary. I complained about the villains, sure, but even with them there's a point of reference for their design in the game. The whole childhood friends thing has no purpose and is a major part of the story, and will be referenced constantly by characters throughout the game. Claude is chastised by his friends for not being brave when he was like 10 years old. Like, what? The 10-year-old didn't save your parents from the burning building? Wow, what a coward. Let's take the entire game to talk about this. I hate to use the first game as an example of good writing, but with its cast, you have different characters from different parts of society with different beliefs that all help paint a picture of the world and will contrast with one another, and we all get to discover about each of them and the world through the characters. Here, everybody knows each other, everybody is from the same place, and everybody is the same age. They're not even from the nation they're fighting for, which never has a point in the game. Since they're already acquainted with each other, we're deprived from learning about them naturally. Instead, all we really get is, hey, remember that one time when we were 10 and we got in trouble? It's absolutely riveting dialogue, has complete bearing on the story, and going through these stories is totally paramount. Okay, enough sarcasm. Speaking of main characters, how are our protagonists? Well, first and foremost, they all suffer greatly from the aforementioned issues. But other than that, Claude is a bit vanilla, but there are some good moments where he gets tested and gets to show some emotion. Granted, those are rare. Riley is kind of the Oppenheimer equivalent in this game, but not enough is really done with that. Kai's development is completely dependent on two other characters, Forseti and Raz, so the issues with their characters becomes her issues as well. Minerva is meant to be the antagonist rival that is meant to clash with Claude so we can get drama, but every time she says things, Claude just goes and really doesn't have much of a clue of what she's talking about. I know this image is a joke, but it's fairly accurate in describing her. There really isn't that much point to her being in the game, and part of me thinks that she was put in as a fan service character. Raz is a big problem. He has the most time spent on him during the game than any other character, and he has the least depth and the shallowest arc. Like, every other character has these elements of ethical and moral quandaries in their arcs, and Raz's whole deal is that he runs around directly into the line of fire talking about how he's gonna murder everyone. People get court-martialed for this stuff, and it's treated like boys will be boys by the cast in this game. Just like how the obnoxious nudity is out of place in this game, so is a character that revels in killing. Part of me thinks that Raz was a character geared towards a Western audience, since in the trailers they talk about working with the Western Sega team, and the traits of Raz might be how Japanese writers view the shooter protagonists in Western video games. Squad missions are back from the PSP releases and involve multiple members at once rather than individuals. This is actually a great idea since it shows your squad mates mingling together more, which is more natural than the individualized approach of previous games. They can range from quite silly to really emotional. My favorite squad mission has got to be A Prayer for the Broken with Godwin, Nico and Rosetta, since it's the most serious in tone. Two characters who have been hard done by, but have gained completely stark perspectives, and the wise but mysterious person who looks out for others. If these three would have been the protagonists, the game truly would have been better since they have such a great character dynamic. That and they weren't created for cynical marketing purposes probably helps their likability. Not only have the graphics improved, but the overall sound design as well. Guns have a bit more punch and are more distinct from one another. The ambience is handled much better with more ambient nature sounds and more sporadic, less repetitive background battle effects. It's not great, but I did want to acknowledge that it is better since I think it really improves the overall presentation. A hallmark of the series is to reuse music, so after 4 games, it can really get dull to hear these tracks again. In regards to the new music, it's just okay, but I say that since it's hard to get a good idea for what this game would have sounded like because half of its soundtrack is borrowed. Voice acting in this game is alright. Just alright. I think in a lot of ways there is a mix of miscasting, maybe not great direction, and not a lot for the voice actors to do with these characters, since they're all a bit flat. Max Middleton is a quality voice actor, one of the best of the newer generation of voice actors, but there isn't really a lot for him to do with Claude, although when the time comes for some more flair in his character, Max Middleton delivers. Erica Mendez and Kaylee Mills, they're okay, not bad, but it really feels like one of those miscast situations, like there would have been better VAs for these roles, more so with the case of Erica Mendez. So Raz isn't a character with a lot of depth, so Greg Chun or the voice director could have looked at the script and have been like, okay, this character is pretty one-dimensional, how about we approach that dialogue in a really unique way to make them a little more interesting? Nope, they just play it exactly how it reads and it's really boring and sort of annoying. Alexis Tipton is just terrible. She plays Minerva like she's angry all the time and has no range with the character. I know Minerva doesn't really give you much to work with, but she should be more prideful and not constantly outwardly aggressive. Quickly on the villains, not great, not great, great Matt Mercer impression, decent, too bad your character is pointless, and I don't even know. In terms of the supporting cast, this is probably the strongest and most consistent for an English release. I can only think of a few that might be a bit flat, which is a pretty good showing for an English dub of a Japanese game. So overall, most of the quality is on the support cast and not the central cast, or in summary, spotty quality like usual. You know, this game has some really great moments. Some of the best moments in the entire series actually. You're forced to send off a squad member to their death, and they all have unique lines of dialogue about being sent off. Great, fantastic. Invading the absolutely gorgeous Imperial capital, and a reasonably challenging mission that is mostly without fantastical boss characters, with new modernized Imperial tanks meant as the last line of defense for the capital. The entire game was building to this, and it delivered. Just fantastic. My favorite mission of the series. And then that struggle to detonate the bomb. Everything has been sacrificed to get to this point. Are you going to trade that in for a peace that might only last a few months? Or do you end the chance of another war right now, despite all the moral baggage that will come with that? Great scene. I was on the edge of my seat. But you know what? Most of the rest of the game is really just pretty dry. And it doesn't reach that level of engagement, hardly ever. The gameplay has definitely been improved and lots of new elements have been added, but it's still relatively basic, and balance in all aspects is still an issue. And just about everybody is in consensus of every release having tonal issues, Valkyria Chronicles 4 being no different. I'm not sure if I'm spoiled by wanting something more. In a lot of ways, it's amazing that this game is decent, let alone exists. And they knew it was sort of a miracle that this game exists, and they make a real effort to give a sense of finality and wrapping up the series in this game. So in a lot of ways, I'm not sure how to feel. Maybe I should cast aside my bitterness and cynicism and be grateful for the experience and opportunity to play this game, despite its numerous and significant flaws. Because in the landscape of video games, this is still a unique piece, and it's becoming increasingly rare to see games like these as the years go on.